Okay, thank you so much. It's great to be here, and the Illinois River watershed is something very special and dear to my heart. And just to introduce myself a little bit and background, why I'm so interested in stormwater and doing this. But I started this morning in Clarksdale, Mississippi, in the great Mississippi alluvial plain. And so I actually grew up in a little place called Bird Eye, Arkansas, which is right off Crowley's Ridge in East Arkansas. And I'm fifth generation. I'm raising my kids, a sixth generation there. And I'm going to read something from the Swamp Land Act of 1850. I'm not going to read the whole thing, so don't worry. The Swamp Land Act of 1850 gave Arkansas the right to identify and sell millions of acres of overflowed and swamplands in the public domain and to use the proceeds to finance internal improvements, principally levees and drainage ditches. Arkansas eventually acquired more than 8,600,000 acres of land through the Swamp Land Act. The grant of land was enormous enough to the state at the time, but it had little permanent impact on the economic development of the state. So my ancestors came to that part of the country in 1840. So 175 years ago, they were a part of draining those swamps, building the levees, and putting in the agricultural land. And here, 175 years later, I'm there, and we're putting those back. And it's interesting, we've got so many, my colleagues here, agencies that are all a part of that system and network, and I appreciate what everyone does in the work. We're all here for the same reason and purpose, preaching to the choir, so to speak. So, but it's great to look at all the different things. So, Henderson, we need to visit, because coming from the alluvial plain, and Scott Simon knows this, as we had actually Fly Oz came down to Duval's Bluff, and we put everyone into the Big Woods and presented a plan called the Big Woods for a revitalization of the Arkansas Delta. That's not something that I'm talking about today, but it's something very dear to me, and hopefully we can continue that vision and create an outdoor recreation revitalization of the economy back in the Arkansas Delta. So, but today we're here at this beautiful facility, and Osage Park is right here to us, and we're gonna be going outside in a little bit. Also, I thought it'd be great to do a case study, so let everyone know kind of the process of this complicated project from the beginning to the end. We started this probably back in nearly 2015. There's probably 5 or 6 different staff members from EDG that have all had an impact and hand on this. It's just a vision of mine, but they do the hard work of getting it through the city, through construction drawings, and functioning and built. So appreciate everyone that had a part of it. We are in the floodplain, wetlands. We're going to talk about the wetlands and the prairies, and we also have a municipal airport. So the complexities here are great. And I see Daryl here, also Arkansas Game and Fish, another complexity. The Lake Bentonville has a flowage easement through the Arkansas Game and Fish. It is a stocked lake, and one of the early issues we came up with is the runway was actually in the flowage easement, or the flowage easement was the runway. So that's something that we are now that the construction is finished, we are mapping the flowage easement so that there is this partnership with Arkansas Game and Fish and so forth. So I want to start with the site analysis aspect of this. A very, very complicated site, as I mentioned, but one of the first things, of course, we want to do is just look at the regional context of the connectivity. And this map is old. It's amazing how quick the bike trails are being built here. We're almost connected to Osage, and Osage will be connected to the network, I would probably within the next 2 years, no doubt. So, and then all of the other different pieces of the parklands around the area. The two things that are first that we think about when we're looking at a project is the ecoregion of where it is. I mean, something that even as a small kid, I always wondered why. I grew up on Crowley's Ridge, so I mean, I ran around in meadows and streams, and we didn't have invasive species and so forth. You go to college and you're taught landscape architecture, and you go into Texas and it's all commercial and so forth. And I actually got to spend time in Austin, where Austin, I think, is where I saw, well, they're doing it right. They're using the hill country as their ecology for replanting their space. And I was like, well, that's what we should be doing. And came back to Arkansas and brought that philosophy with us. So what you're seeing in projects that we do, we're doing exactly that. We're taking the ecology of the region. We want to replicate, reintroduce the species that are supposed to be here. And then the second thing is the watershed. If I was the person that created our boundaries or counties or whatever, first we wouldn't have any. I like to look at things in the ecology and ecoregions, and I mentioned the Mississippi alluvial plain earlier. The Mississippi River creates a division of Mississippi and Arkansas. But if you look at the Mississippi alluvial plain, it's Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, and it has no boundaries, no political boundaries or no economic boundaries. And that's how we like to look at a place. The same thing with the watershed. You know, instead of county lines, I would have watersheds would be our boundaries of demarcation amongst areas. And I think that as the future goes, it's so important that water is going to be so important, and it really makes sense if you start to think about that. Pull up the Arkansas map of watersheds and look at it and think about it sometime. It's really quite fascinating. So breaking down this project, as Travis mentioned, the little Osage Creek, and we are at the upper end of that watershed. So if you see that little blue line at the very top of it, is basically Thaden School. So, and a lot of the drainage channels from Thaden School to here are concrete lined. One issue we had looking at this park, and let me go ahead and, so that's little Osage Creek that comes in from the north. We have then another subwatershed that was coming into Lake Bentonville. Keep in mind, Lake Bentonville, there's a big dam right there, and it was separated from little Osage Creek, but they converged here at the I Street Bridge. And the Lake Bentonville water had a spillway right outside here where the kayak launch is, a concrete spillway that went into a degraded channel and went into a concrete trapezoidal channel that went to the I Street Bridge. So keep that in mind, because one of the big moves we made is the fact that the wetlands are there, and we combined these two watersheds as one, utilizing the existing wetland to cleanse that water before it went on downstream, which is so important because one of Nature Conservancy's projects, Logan Springs on Osage Creek downstream, when we go down there, you see the impact of the development as you get further away of what's happening and the cattle farms and so forth. So, so these past presentations were really touching to me and the impact of this. One slide I wish I would have had on here is, and all the different projects that we have in the Illinois River watershed. It almost creates this little rain chain type of events. We're going to be beginning one at the very upper part of that watershed at the Thaden School, and then this would be the second one. This is a major one, and it's scaled appropriately for it. The Jones Center, we're going to be doing some things at the upper end of that watershed coming in. And then I mentioned the Logan Springs, some stormwater mitigation there as well. But you want to be on that upper end of the watershed and have this rain chain type of a thing to have the biggest impact as you go down. And I think that we're starting to create this map, and we're going to see some change over time. So these are drone shots, aerials of the site existing. There was really like not any fall out there. It was really a wet pasture area, agricultural back history. Theo Witzel, I know his name came up today as well, went out and did an ecological assessment. Any project we're involved in like this, we like to have ecological assessments done and a botanical assessment, and that way we have a plant species palette that we would like to use or replicate for the project. The main feature here, though, are these wetlands. And no, they're not natural wetlands. You know, this is something that I'm used to seeing back in the Arkansas Delta, but these were beaver wetlands. And this was probably one of the most complicated aspects of the project. We had a lot of different, I guess we had a lot of different people with different ideas of how to deal with the beavers. Of course, the airport wants them to go away. The federal government wants them to go away. And I understand that because, you know, with bird strikes and so forth, we need to not create areas of wildlife, right? The lake was already here. It was grandfathered in, and it was a fishing lake. So the lake was going to be here regardless. And actually, the wetlands pulled pressure off of that lake because the wildlife really wanted to be in those wetlands over the lake. And we'll talk about some things that we did to try to mitigate wildlife there as well. But they really had to fight for, let's keep the wetlands, let's control the beavers from building them bigger and flooding the entire site. And we did this through, believe it or not, I think it's Steve Lyle, his company is called the Beaver Deceiver, and he's out of either Maine or Vermont, and came down and helped us facilitate these pond leveling systems over the existing dams. So the beavers hear the water running, they're going to continually work all night to try to stop it. So this allows the level of the water to stay the same on both sides without that noise, because it grabs the water and releases it further down away from the dam. And they're really, really fascinating. There's over 80 beavers out there. You know, our argument was you will never win against the beaver population. The beaver population will only decline if there's not any food available for them. So the decision was to work with them. And honestly, I think that as long as we control what's happening there, they're the best stormwater management team you could have, with those wetlands. And we're going to get to go out there and walk through those wetlands and so forth, and you could see exactly the impact. So this is existing. Talk about floodplains and wetlands. Look at this floodplain that comes through this site. And the green areas are mapped wetlands also. So, and I mentioned Theo did the botanical assessment, but he also did looked at the site and did a low to mid to high ecological value of zones. And so we took that and we didn't want to develop within those high ecological value zones, obviously. I mean, and then even the mid ecological zones, we want it to be more passive. And then the low ecological zones is where we put the infrastructure pieces for the site. It's just the existing image of a wetland. And back to the park's watershed system of how Lake Bentonville and Little Osage Creek, so we expanded the lake. We moved the outflow structure from right here to where we'll go out and see it on site. And what that did, it combined those two watersheds and put them behind the Beaver Wetland. And so the Beaver Wetland is the best tool. I mean, that wetland would have cost us $3 million to design and build. It cost us nothing. All we did was put a boardwalk through it. We didn't even spend any money on the landscape, because as we put that boardwalk through, it just revegetated right back. In fact, I think they're out there, you know, knocking the grasses and stuff off of it just so people can walk on it. but it gets used so much that they don't have to do that anymore. And then flipping back to the prairies, this was actually also in Theo's report. This was 1840. I mean, this is interesting because I was talking about the 1840s and the Land Swamp Act, and this is 1840 map of the Osage Prairie. So where I'm from, the wetlands were degraded. Well, think of all the development that's going on here. What we loved about the ecology of this place, it's where the Osage Prairie starts to join the Ozark forest land. And there's a transitional, you can see it right here. Look at how all the orange are 1840 map Osage Prairie lands. If you overlay the development on that today, it's very, very few of it left at all. I mean, it's, that would be an interesting graphic to do as well. But the star is there at Osage Creek. So we took it on not only just this project, but as a firm practice in Northwest Arkansas. Our team utilizes plants historically from the Osage Prairie for reestablishment. And then also we do go into the Ozarks and riparian forest type as well. But we really like, and that's why you see all of our projects, you see these grasses and so forth, they kind of stick out. They're really fascinating. So that's really the analysis of what we're dealing with. And then I mentioned some of this, the site strategies, going from the active, we kept the active to the very, that far corner where we put the parking and the pavilion and so forth, and kept the whole core of it very passive so that the development that went in there, it could reestablish itself. And the main focus of this entire park, and let me emphasize, what we see what you saw from Travis was presenting earlier. We feel like our goal is to help keep those instances from happening. If we can take development and implement some of the strategies that you're going to see today, that's going to help heal those areas downstream that we're continually spending money to try to repair and fix. So we're all working together in this. But this is a stormwater project that but we also want to integrate people, the public. We don't want to dig a big detention pond and put a fence around it. This is a valuable land. We've got to be able to allow the public to see it for two reasons: for the green space in urban areas, and this will become an urban area over time, and also for the education aspect of it. When we're out there, the wayfinding signage and the education signage is so important to the project because it teaches the public what happens to trash, rain, your irrigation, if you fertilize your lawns, you see all of these things impacted into these systems. And I think that you leave a better person as far as, wanting to do what you can to help the watershed. So you'll see two big ellipses out there, and as the rain events, from the non-event to the minor event to the 100-year event, creek flood, and then 100-year lake flood. The lake has some areas where it can actually go up through the elevated walkways and flood some areas, and then obviously the creek and the floodplain was designed to do the same. One important thing with the wildlife on the lake is the geese, something that anybody that has a water body, they're always struggling with is the geese. Geese like the type of lakes that have been designed for forever, like, perfectly clear, sodded, right down to the shoreline so they can move in and out. Don't worry about predators. The key, and this was a difficult one because this is a fishing lake, so we need to have access to the shoreline for fishing. But the key is to create a vegetative fringe, not only for the wildlife, but that also is a pulse that helps shoreline erosion and, of course, ecology just in general, but the water quality, because if you look at those watersheds, you are getting that fertilizer, phosphorus, nitrogen runoff. The Lake Bentonville, there's a nursery across Walton Boulevard. So we know what's coming from that nursery. And what happens, and when everybody sees the green algae or whatever, it's just the nutrient load overtakes the ability for the existing plant species or the aquatics to be able to uptake. So that's when you start to get those algae blooms. This is just an aerial floating over the pavilion, and the pavilion designed by Modis Architects, and it's something that we wanted it to feel like it was a part of the landscape, and I think they did a fantastic job. The ellipse piece there, you see, when we're out on site, we can look at like where the dam was and how it was opened up. One thing is, we want it to feel natural. There's a huge berm out there, but we did put a berm over here, so if I'm standing here looking at parking there, but if you're in the back of the room and looking over, it's, I call it a haw-haw berm. You know, you use a haw-haw fence. Is a hidden fence in the landscape, on the English landscape, that you wouldn't see. We wanted to do that with the parking, so it felt a little bit more natural. This is the wetland system, so it really, literally was not touched, besides the helical piers went in, and it was constructed, and we backed out of it and let the vegetation just come back and take. This is a good photo of the ellipses. So the water comes up in that lower ellipse, and you can see the boardwalk piece for the second ellipse, so it goes up underneath it. And that whole entire area floods, and that's taking up the excessive floodwater areas. This is where the weir was moved to combine the two. So all of that water now comes through and moves through that boardwalk system. This is the lower one where the water moves underneath the boardwalk and into that low wet prairie. And on the ecology side of it, you can see how we start to think about the wetlands, the lowland forest, the wetland aquatic fringe, tallgrass prairie, shortgrass prairie, turf, and so forth, and start to break out those different areas. And when we start breaking these areas out, I hear maintenance a lot. Maintenance is a huge deal because these type of landscapes are not in the landscape economy of today. I would love to see schools and colleges or community colleges start to train, you know, even just landscape contracting or even maintenance companies to do to work on these type of landscapes, because that's one of the big gaps that we're seeing. And I've been doing this for 20 years. You know, Heifer International was our first one, and I've seen a little bit of growth. I think it's elevating now. Seems like in the past 3 to 5 years, everything tends to be kind of moving towards this realm. So hopefully that'll force the issue a little bit, but we're still way behind the game. And also, anybody that thinks that creating meadows, tallgrass meadows, drygrass meadows are easy, they're not. They're extremely difficult. And the best advice I could say, if you want to have success, do that botanical survey. Look at the species that are growing there now. Don't flip through a wildflower catalog and think that, oh, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to get, because you won't. You won't get it. I can promise you that. I mean, I've been there. I've tried that. And so get the botanical survey, look at the species, but then also look at species that would do well in those type of soil conditions and so forth, and you will have so much more success. But after that, it's the management and also the expectations of how long it takes for something like that to establish itself. And that's why you're going to see when we're out on site, it's not all native. We typically use a sodded fringe so that, because public like to have something manicured against them, not right up against the trail, and then our native is pushed a little bit further back. And I've learned that's a very good aesthetic for the public. They like that. They like seeing the manicured and the native. And I've always used a rule of thumb of, say 70% native, 30% manicured or typical landscape. And that tends to help that idea of it just looking like a mess and when are you going to mow it. We also tend to use, when we're up against buildings like this, even though it's not the right thing to do in nature, because nature wants a diversity of species, but the general public don't want a diversity of species. They want to see a monoculture and clean. So, you know, this is a mass of Indian grass, a massing of horsetail reed, and a massing of prairie dropseed around you right here. And it makes it feel a little bit more organized and clean. Some of the plant material that you'll find, rose mallow was all over that wetland. The beavers, it's almost like they designed it themselves, because really the beaver dam is an architectural feature in its own right, and it's the top of it is all rose mallow. So if you come out here in July, it's just beautiful white flowers. We didn't do any of it. I mean, I had nothing to do with that at all. Soft rush is something that, the rush family is something that we use a lot of. It's a very, very good, a lot of the plants that I get are probably driving the back roads in the Arkansas Delta and looking what everybody pushed off their farm fields into the ditch. And it's like, and it lives in the wet and it lives in the dry. And so I'm like, well, that's a pretty tough plant, so we're going to use that. And soft rush is one of them. Rose mallow is one of them. Indian grass is a good one for us. Of course, little blue stem up here, not in the Delta so much. We see some obedient plant here in colonies along, actually, Osage Creek. I found a colony of it out at 28th Street Park, which will be under construction here this next year. Your Rudbeckias and your Coreopsis are great ones because they're annual and germinate quickly. Keep in mind, a lot of your wildflowers and your native grasses, we tend to put in as plugs, because native grasses will take 2-3 years to really, they're growing roots, because they're growing roots like 3 feet, 10 feet deep, until they know they can sustain themselves to pop up the top. So we found that it's more successful to go ahead and just put the native grasses in as plugs, and then use a heavy dose of seed that would get germinate and flower that first year, and then your perennials, mix it in there, and then maintain and know how to maintain it over the course of time. So, in the final, I mentioned this some, and we'll look at the actual thing, but the wayfinding and the education, I think, is so important to help the public just understand, why are we doing this, and the importance of it. So that I'm going to end there. I'd love to take questions, and we're also, I think we're gonna divide maybe, and go in maybe several groups and do a site walk. So, and I've got, our team is here, so they're here to answer questions as well. But if anyone has anything in particular here, I'd love to see if I can answer. And I don't know how long I took, but it's probably a little bit, it's not bad. Mr. Simon. Yes, sir.
Hey, that was great. Your park's beautiful.
Thank you.
Great to work with. Thanks for working with us. So how do you maintain the meadows? You sort of referenced it, but what do you actually recommend doing?
So we've had, and this has become, because it's over time, it's been something we've struggled with. We've created these sister companies. One's called Native Restoration and Management, and one's Arkansas Native Plant Nursery. And Cody George in the back that started at Crystal Bridges and with Pill Compton and at Thaden School, he has joined, and he's running Native Restoration and Management. So our goal is to design and manage. In fact, I would rather, it's hard because when you get into these bid situations, it's hard to get control over all of it. And when you're designing and installing, there's also only about 4 months of the year I feel very comfortable about installing the meadows. But as we all know, projects need to be finished in December, January, or July, August, and I need that meadow finished, and I need it to be successful. So these are things that we're trying to figure out internally. How do we navigate that system? Our goal is for a successful project So right now, Osage is being managed by Pill Compton Foundation. They've got their own team. Cody has assisted, and just because it's, you need to know what went in to be able to manage it. And I hope that answered your question. I think it's something that we're still trying to figure out too, and create the right formula for. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name's Curtis Leister. How do you keep litter from flowing into your lake?
It's a very good question. It happens, and that's actually also a very good educational piece. So when the public come out and sees litter and trash and so forth, we actually end up putting trash booms in. This one, I think it's right there coming over, was that 112 or 16th Street, and the city. I think the city is managing that. Could be Pill Compton, I'm not sure, but trash booms. Some other projects we've done, all of them have trash collection. The Clinton Wetlands, it has a pretty massive trash collection system because there's a ginormous pipe that just empties directly into it. It's like a cage that catches and floats up and down. And then Hendricks Preserve in Conway had, I saw Mr. Mosley here. He was with Walmart back there. Don is. We remember working on it. He got us a grant for putting in some trash booms and doing some work at the Hendricks Preserve, which is much appreciative of. And so that helps. But you've got to then have that management team to go out and collect the trash. Does it get rid of all of it? No. I mean, and it builds up around. Will be interesting to see the walk the wetlands. When I've been out here, I haven't seen a lot, but I will say that those wetlands, when they were being constructed, they were littered. And crossing construction, even some folks from our office, and I think there's a wetland team, or I can't remember, that there's been a lot of groups that have come and helped clean it up. So that's why it looks so good now. Thanks.
Other questions? Yeah.
So I'm really interested, you're utilizing native grasses and sort of like Springfield Prairie ecology in your parks, but has there been an effort to move this out of park habitats and into practicing agricultural habitats? Because we know species like this are highly drought resistant, like you were just talking about, so this is really good for pasture management as we think through these widening spells of, dry spells like we just came out of here. So is there a feasible way for groups like what y'all do to interact in a meaningful way with farmers like myself to try to think through restoration ecosystems, but in an agriculturally productive way?
And actually have cattle graze?
Yeah.
At the same time?
Yeah.
I think that, I don't know specifically. I know there's native grasses that cattle will graze. I don't know, you've got that, it's got to regen quickly. I think you'd almost I'm not going to tell you the exact answer, but I'm not going to say that it's not possible. I think it's a very good question, and it's something that we should research a little bit more. If we could come up with the grasses, because one thing I will say that I have my sheep graze my meadow, and the native grasses in the summer, I mean, they keep the weeds down, and they would top the grasses, but they continually come back. If I pulled them off of it, they would just flourish. So I guess what my answer is, it's almost like an organic farmer that is rotating their pasture land, moving the cattle through. I think it would have to be a very well-organized, sequenced event cycle like that to allow it to re-veg. But the blue stems and the Indian grasses, I just don't know how palatable those are. I know that they won't eat like broom sedge, and honestly, most farmers are trying to get rid of all the native species so that they can get something that the animals would rather graze on. But I don't know, you look at the buffalo and the Osage Prairie, I mean, there's got to be, I think it's a great question. It needs to be looked at more deeply. Anyone else? Well, thank you so much. And if something else comes up, just let's discuss it outside.
Thank you, Martin.